So our last speaker for today is Katherine Ware. Katherine Ware has served as Curator of Photography here at the New Mexico Museum of Art since 2008, where she has organized inventive exhibitions on subjects including breath, lowriders, self-portraiture, and mixed media photography. She previously served as Curator of Photographs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and as Assistant Curator in the Department of Photographs at the J. Paul Getty Museum. She has also worked with the photography collection at the Oakland Museum of California and began her career at the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service in Washington, D.C. So please welcome our last speaker for the day, our very own Katherine Ware.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thanks to all of you for being here. And gosh, what an inspiring morning. It really has kind of moved my thinking forward on some things I'm working on. So that'll be useful, and I'll really look forward to looking back at these talks, which are being recorded, and reading some of the publications that have been mentioned. Well, today I'd like to introduce you to artist Ann Noggle, and show how she explored, revealed, and perhaps developed her identity in her photographic work, revealing her multiplicity of selves, and trying others on for size, often in a very playful way. And this will be much more of a biographical introduction to her. I'm trying out this goldenrod color, see what you think. Her photographic vision centers on herself and her world of family, friends, and lovers, a personal approach that was at odds with the prevailing standard of the art photography of the time that was established earlier in the 20th century, but was changing around the time that she began working in the medium, and she was part of that shift. She's best known for her frank and inventive use of herself as a model, whether in the course of daily events or dressed up in a variety of situations and guises, which you saw in the previous image. Here you see images of her mother Agnes, her sister Mary, and her longtime partner known as Shelley. Noggle's work remains fairly unknown, but she was an active participant in the growing world of art photography of the 1970s and 1980s, exhibiting her photographs, teaching, organizing exhibitions, publishing, receiving reviews, and she was an officer with the Nascent Society for Photographic Education, a professional organization founded in 1963 to promote the emerging academic field of art photography. In an essay in After Image in 1980, Jan Zita Grover wrote about Noggle's work and noted the lack of critical engagement with her work by male reviewers, ascribing it less to the photographer's gender and more to her use of portraiture. Grover saw Noggle's work as a shift away from the formalism that was more comfortable for many critics, and noted that the photographs required viewers to confront the subject of the picture in ways that were challenging. Noggle's status as a queer artist in the 1970s and 1980s was not something she emphasized, perhaps not surprising for someone born in 1922. It was simply who she was. Nor did she identify herself as a feminist, coming into middle age and photography at a time when the women's movement and other civil rights movements were an active part of social dialogue. In her art, she concentrates on female subjects, and particularly older women, quietly asserting their accomplishments, style, and unconventional beauty, as well as the idea that life is not over for them. Quote, most students, when they're sent out to take a picture of an older person, go out and look for wrinkles, Noggle later said. I just thought that they, the women, were beautiful. I had a little rule. I didn't want to photograph anybody until they got to be 40 years old. Noggle's niece, Dale Pease, lives in Albuquerque, and when I was talking with her about her own mother and grandmother posing for Ann Noggle, I asked if she had any pictures that she had been pressed into service as a model, or if she had any pictures that Ann Noggle had taken of her. And she just laughed and said, no, I was too young. From a young age, Noggle's first passion was flying, and that became a central aspect of her identity, how she saw herself. Quote, it seemed to be a great adventure. It seemed to be a great freedom and adventure, she told a reporter in a 1984 interview. And she says her family took her to an air show when she was quite young. And, quote, the plane landed and Amelia Earhart got out. And I said, that's what I want to do. Her mother signed her certificate to fly, and she worked at a local airport to pay for lessons. She had her pilot's license before she graduated high school, and at age 21, she became a Women's Air Force Service Pilot, a WASP, one of 1,700 women working for the U.S. Army during World War II. Quote, it's terrible to say you enjoyed World War II, Noggle said, but I just had a lot of fun. After the WASPs were disbanded in 1944, she worked as a flight instructor, stunt pilot, and then as a crop duster in Clovis and Hobbs, New Mexico, before returning to active duty as a captain during the Korean War. She left the military when respiratory issues, likely caused by her work as a crop duster, disqualified her from flying. So after more than a decade as a professional pilot, she was forced to give up this central part of her life and identity in her mid to late 30s and to reimagine herself. She moved to New Mexico and because of her interest in art that she developed when in Paris during the Korean War, she decided to enroll at the University of New Mexico with the intention of earning a bachelor's degree in art history. The other students, in their late teens, earning bachelor's degrees, considered a freshman in her late 30s quite unusual and ancient, but she embraced the role as a beginner and started studying with some of the greats in the field, including the foundational photo historian Beaumont Newhall and Richard Rudisil, the latter of whom became a close friend. The photography faculty at the time were major figures known for their innovative approach to the medium, among them Tom Barrow and Betty Hahn. So it was a very fertile environment. In 1963, the curator, photographer, and historian Ben Darren Koch arrived from the George Eastman House Museum in Rochester, New York, to serve as head of art and art history and as founding director of the University Art Museum at UNM. Koch was a charismatic and divisive figure who, like Noggle, was a military veteran. He pursued a career in the arts and established himself as an important figure in the field of photography and photo history, and he was a very significant figure in her own professional journey. And we talk a lot these days about children especially seeing somebody like them in a role and that makes it easier to aspire to it. Well, Amelia Earhart was the first for the pilot, and in some ways Koch was a figure like that for Noggle, you know, not the same gender, et cetera, but maybe the fact that he had been a vet was part of that identification to some degree. It was only during her last semester that Noggle took a required photography class, and she fell in love with a new machine, the camera. She later said that watching a photograph develop in the darkroom was almost as exciting as flying an airplane. She completed her bachelor's in art history in 1966 and went into the master's program in art at UNM, which she completed in 1969. Here you see an image she made many years later after her first monograph, Silver Lining, Photographs by Anne Noggle, was published in 1983, with an introduction by her mentor, Koch. The title of this photograph is worth noting. It is I, it is he, it is she, as she simultaneously conflates and distinguishes herself from Koch. Dressing and posing as her mentor, quite convincingly, I'd say, based on the photograph of him there. She's likely honoring him as well as poking a bit of fun. But by the time she made it, she had already tried on his professional identities as photographer, curator, and educator. So in a sense, she had become him. In the picture, she's performing him, in a way, you might say. Although opportunities for women in the field were still somewhat limited. So dressing in clothing identified as male may have been commenting on that disparity or some of those challenges that she faced. Here at the museum, we have a collection of about 100 of Noggle's photographic prints, including some examples of her very early work, such as these surrealist inflected images you see, which was a sensibility that she shared with Koch. And you see her exploring abstraction and form, using the camera to capture things in the world around her, but making them appear unfamiliar or strange, either by softening focus or by her use of framing the image. And here are a few more early examples. These are from when she was in graduate school, mid-60s, I think 1966 was her first year of grad school, and into the 70s. As she continued seeking her artistic voice, we see her roving around Albuquerque, photographing subjects that caught her eye, like these workers digging a grave. She regularly homes in on scenes from everyday life, and especially subjects close to home, very literally, as here we see her Volkswagen and her dachshunds. So it's a very pointedly subjective approach to photography. As she increasingly saw herself in the role of artist and art historian, Noggle sought out influential female elders in those fields who were nearby, including Eugenie Chenard and Laura Gilpin, as well as colleagues at UNM, such as photographer and mixed media artist Betty Hahn, with whom she maintained a very close friendship. Noggle worked primarily with a 35mm camera, but also worked with a Panon Widelux camera during these years, which had a rotating lens with a 140-degree range. So you see an example of that in the top image. Again, she was trying things out and finding her way. And so she's, in the top image, you see her using the Widelux to make what's called an environmental portrait of Eugenie Chenard in her own space. And so in that sense, she's using her surroundings to represent the artist rather than her visage, so to speak. Whereas in the photograph of Laura Gilpin, who was another really important figure to Noggle, as a woman who had established a very successful career in photography, as well as being a lesbian. And in this portrait, which was made in the last year of Gilpin's life, she comes in very close, and so the background isn't important at all. That's really just a wall, essentially. So she's really concentrating on the face, seen close up and in profile, which is a very different kind of portrayal from the one above, and really is very much connected with her interest in these ideas of images of older women. After graduation, Noggle was working very seriously as an artist, but also rededicated herself to art history, to the history of photography specifically, at a time when the medium was beginning to be more widely accepted into museums as an art form. She taught as an adjunct professor at UNM and became the first curator of photographs at the Museum of Fine Arts in Santa Fe. That's us, now known as the New Mexico Museum of Art, though as a part-time unpaid volunteer. The first exhibition she organized at the museum was photographs by Win Bullock, a beloved Northern California photographer. And here you see his iconic Child in Forest from 1951, which continued to resonate for her as she later posed herself similarly in a 1985 self-image titled The Old Nymph, one of many art history references found in her work. While here, she oversaw the acquisition of more than 700 photographs by 62 artists, which came primarily as donations, including a generous selection of her own work. Among the work she acquired are photographs by Ansel Adams, Harry Callahan, Lottie Jacoby, Dorothea Lange, Dwayne Michaels, Elliot Porter, Edward Weston, and a massive archive of work by Todd Webb, as well as work by some of her compatriots at UNM. Noggle also became co-organizer of a project spearheaded by Marjorie Mann at the San Francisco Museum of Art, an ambitious exhibition catalog and traveling show about female photographers, Women of Photography, a historical survey. In her short essay for the book, Noggle notes that a revised edition of Beaumont Newhall's fundamental publication, The History of Photography, included only 13 women, which he claimed was not attributable to gender, but to quality of work. I doubt she believed that, and as part of her essay, she chose to write about a new climate of opportunity for women in photography. She also noted that the photographic response to the current women's movement showed, quote, a noticeable upswing in self-portraits, often in series, as a means of self-exploration, with the intention of revealing something heretofore unknown. Along with photographing themselves, women are photographing women. Deliberately and provocatively, they are aiming their cameras at women as individuals, rather than as models or symbols. They're zeroing in on the essence. The results are head-on encounters with real people, projecting an identity of self. And that is precisely the path she followed with her own work over the next decade. In 1975, Noggle decided to get a facelift and to document her recovery with the camera. Here I'm showing you a portrait of Noggle by Mariana Cook, another great portrait photographer, taken when Noggle was teaching a photo workshop on the West Coast in 1972, so you can see what she looked like before going under the knife. She had already undergone a number of lung surgeries and felt these had aged her prematurely. Quote, people will think I am vain because I had a facelift, Noggle told art historian Dana Asbury. But whatever the implications of narcissism that are associated with facelifts and self-portraiture, are more than balanced by the images themselves, which are frank and unromantic. Noggle said, people tell me that the photographs of me are not in any way flattering. They are not meant to be. They're supposed to be real. Here are 3 images from the facelift series that she took in her yard in Albuquerque. The first one has become emblematic of the series. For some, it's a bit gruesome. You see her stitches and bruises are very visible around her eyes, and she really offers a very close view of that intentionally. She's showing you that, and that tender area with the stitching. She poses almost like an ingenue, though, gazing at us with a rose between her lips. And she talks about framing this shot very carefully to include the rose as a symbol of beauty. And also in the background by the rose bush, you see a wooden airplane on a stake, a whirligig, that is there as an attribute of her identity as a pilot, even though she was grounded. It's very self-assured. She's not suffering for beauty, but proudly bearing the scars of an eventful life, battered but unbroken, and happy to confront us with our own discomforts and squeamishness, as she does in some of her nude self-images. I use myself at times as a model to express something, usually to do with the way time shapes and changes us, Noggle said, that I think in a way other people would be reluctant to be pictured. Though less of a surprise today, many of her images nonetheless feel radical, bold, like a woman taking charge of her life to assert, I am my own subject. I am a subject of art. Some of these are given suggestive titles, such as this one, Stonehenge Decoded, in which she presents herself partially nude in the elemental New Mexico landscape, rather than any idealized or mythologizing way. And I love that, no, I'm not sure that's true. What I remember from seeing the picture is that you can kind of see the impression of the an elastic waistband on her skin. And so again, just very unidealized and unromanticized. And, she's driving and jumps out and yanks down her britches and takes a picture. I think that's what she was like. I never got to meet her. Let's see. Self-image is how she titled many of the photographs of herself, not self-portrait. In thinking about those words, I would say that portrait or even self-portrait are words that carry a connotation of objectivity, a sense of critical observation. To me, self-image fits Noggle's more subjective and fluid presentation of herself as someone who can be seen in many ways, embodying flux and multiplicity. But I haven't found any record of her own thinking in using that terminology. Here she is wearing pearls and floating in Cochiti Lake, located partway between here and Albuquerque, suspended between air and water, meeting our gaze, whether a nymph or an Ophelia. She used a shutter release to make some of these images, but for others, such as this one, she relied on her friend and longtime studio assistant, Jim Holbrook, to press the shutter. She drove a lot back and forth between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. Her family was here. Some of her jobs were here. Some of her jobs were in Albuquerque. So you see, continuing the transportation theme of earlier this morning, the car was an important site for her. Portraits and self-portraits. What can we hope to glean from them? Each of us is a bundle of contradictions in the process of becoming. And the camera is always operated by a subjective being loaded with biases. What truth could be revealed about an individual or about the prospect of living in a human body? Noggle said she was trying for an image that gets beneath the surface into that unchanging area of the human psyche, formed early in life, which grows into maturity but does not relinquish its basic character. And in the catalog for UNM's show of her self-portraits in 2000, she's quoted as saying, "The image I see is of youth betrayed by age, of spirit strong but fragile with time." Perhaps that's as universal as it gets. For one thing we truly share as a species is an awareness of our mortality. Here she is in the Volkswagen. In 1982, Noggle applied for a John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, proposing to photograph older women in different communities, a rural community in East Texas and a cosmopolitan one in Seattle. As you can see from this picture, she was a successful applicant. She did often photograph herself in the VW Beetle as she drove back and forth between Santa Fe and Albuquerque over the years. But this is a special occasion, and presumably she could not stop smiling. Around this time, she began working with the University of New Mexico Press on a monograph of her photographs, published in 1984. Reviewing the book for a photography publication, artist and educator Barbara DeGenevieve wrote, "Anne Noggle's photography is subversive, for it thinks and makes us think about things we probably don't want to confront, aging and mortality." "I photographed the tragedy of the fallen flesh," Noggle said of her continuing interest in photographing older women, either in portraits or posing them in various vignettes. Her mother, Agnes, was a frequent model, and here Noggle photographs her well-aged hands holding her dentures. It's an entirely realist use of the camera, but with a sense of the macabre, reinforced by the title, Artifact. Her mother said that posing for the photographs was her gift to her daughter, but she never wanted to look at the results. Another frequent subject and muse was the artist's close friend, Yolanda Bololi, a Boston native known for her sculpture. Yolanda had married the Italian architect Count Giorgio Bololi in the 1930s. They bought land on Upper Canyon Road and constructed their elaborate home, the House of Triumph. The couple separated in 1947, and Yolanda remained in the home until her death in 1983 when she bequeathed it to Noggle. She was an important figure in encouraging her interest in art and as a model of an iconoclastic female life. In the 1980s, we see Noggle coming in closer with the camera to capture faces, coaxing a dialogue between the surface of the face, its map, and the dynamic inner lives of these elders. Of all the groups that are discriminated against, there is just as much discrimination against older people, she noted, regarding the fact that for older women especially, the effects of gravity, declining elasticity of skin, and their perceived lack of sex appeal often results in social dismissal or invisibility. But she was not interested in showing the decline, but rather their ongoing vitality. There's often humor in the picture, whimsy, and the pleasure of dressing up and adopting another persona, such as in these later self-images making reference to art and popular culture icons, showing herself as an aging woman too. So here she places herself in the role of the courtesan in the 1863 oil painting by French painter Edouard Manet, and as Marilyn Monroe in The 7-Year Itch. She's having fun. In the mid to late 1980s, Noggle dedicated herself to several documentary projects that combined her love of flying and photography to bring the contributions of women pilots to the fore. For God, Country, and the Thrill of It, published in 1990, included her portraits of women pilots taken at a reunion of the WASPs at their old training field in Sweetwater, Texas. And A Dance with Death, Soviet Airwomen in World War II, published in 1994, featured portraits of 67 Russian women who flew in combat against the German Air Force during World War II. Our last image is of the artist in the back of a 2-seater open cockpit plane in Arizona, which she arranged for to celebrate getting the Guggenheim Fellowship, alongside an excerpt from a poem she wrote. I look up at myself under the helmet, over the mask, through the goggles. Look at me, I say. Look at me, riding through eternity. Thank you.